Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Dave, you wanted to quit your job, but your rental income wasn't exactly where you wanted it to be, but you ended up leaving your job. How did you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had decided to get my real estate broker's license to become an agent about 9 months before I actually resigned. So I was able to start my sort of second career while I was doing my first and have them overlap. Even that didn't provide me anywhere near as much income as my W-2 right away, because being a broker, you have to build relationships and a book of business, and it takes a year or two, I think, to gain traction. But I had some savings, and I had listened to enough, podcasts like yours and read books to believe that I should make the jump. And I believed in myself, and it worked out really well.
When you didn't have that 9-to-5 job anymore and you were able to focus full time on real estate, both as an agent and as an investor, someone looking to buy more rental properties, is that when your rental income really increased to the point where it was covering all your living expenses?
Yeah. I mean, within a year, I was making, more than I used to. And within 2 years, I mean, it's almost, it's probably 10 or 20 times more. So, I had thought all along, maybe I'm costing myself money by staying in these golden handcuffs and this, comfortable job that pays the bills. And I've definitely found that to be true in my case. I don't think that would be true for everyone. But I do have the sort of entrepreneur bug, and I wanted to scratch that itch.
I've got a great show for you today. Some of the things we're going to be talking to Dave about are the type of return that he's looking for when he wants to buy a new property. We'll talk about a pretty creative way that he's been able to cut his expenses to make his properties cash flow better. And we'll get his opinion on whether he thinks you're better off having just a couple of rental properties or a bigger rental portfolio. Joining us on the show today from Yarmouth, Maine is Dave Holman. We'll take a really quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Dave. There is a ton of paperwork involved when you're getting a mortgage on a rental property. Lenders are going to want to see 2 years of tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements. I mean, it's a lot of work and a huge hassle. Shaylee Ridge from Ridge Lending Group has a brand new loan program where she doesn't care about any of that. She actually doesn't need any paperwork from you at all. She's just going to look at the deal. The most important thing she wants to see is, does it make sense? Is the property going to cash flow? If it does, she'll give you a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Now, the rates are going to be a little bit higher than a traditional full doc loan, but it's still a great deal, somewhere between 3.9 and 5%. She can close quickly, and there's no hassle. She can even do a cash-out refi with this program. If you want to learn more, just reach out to Shaylee at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE. lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. A good deal on a rental property isn't going to last very long. To win properties today, you need to move quickly when a deal comes on the market, but it takes time to analyze a property. I want to let you know about an app where you can analyze deals on your phone in seconds. It's called Ask Rick, that's RIC for Rental Income Calculator. You can analyze a deal with the push of a button. You can figure out the rent, your mortgage payment, your expenses, and figure out the cash flow. If the numbers make sense, you can make an offer right there on the app, or you can send a calendar invite to your agent to see the property in person. Ask Rick is currently offering a free 7-day trial. Just search for Ask Rick in the App Store or go to Just Ask Rick. That's RIC, justaskrick.com. So, Dave, you were saying at the beginning that you quit your job before you had enough rental income. How many doors were you at when you actually quit?
I was at 33 doors, almost all of which were residential apartments, 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. And if I had not reinvested any money in my buildings and I had simply taken all of that cash flow, maybe it would have been almost enough to live on or enough. But for better or worse, I'm constantly reinvesting money, and I have to stop myself sometimes from over improving things. But I think that works out well in the end, because I've actually, come to learn that appreciation is actually more powerful than cash flow, at the end of the day. And so the reinvestment has definitely paid off.
Sure. Yeah. Appreciation really, really is powerful. It's just incredible. And as you get a bigger and bigger portfolio, you just have more units appreciating. So yeah, it really, really can snowball.
I think cash flow is critical to get into something. I would never buy an asset that didn't either have or have the quick potential for, positive cash flow, but it's not the be all and end all. And I think it can actually be the dangly key distraction for investors away from, a bigger picture, where in an ideal world, you'd want to balance, your properties where you can get both cash flow and appreciation.
Now, where are you today? How many doors do you have today?
A little bit north of 130. We're, been acquiring quite a few this year. So it's always a moving target. And sometimes we're building, new units in vacant space or things like that. But that's about the number. And it's about 2/3 residential and 1/3 commercial. And the commercial is a mix, mostly office, but we have some restaurant, and other types as well, like retail.
You mentioned at the beginning that you're a realtor, and I know you've got some other businesses and other income streams. If they all went away today, would your cash flow support you 100%? Like, would you be able to pay all your bills on your cash flow?
Yes, at this point it would.
Awesome. Well, congrats. That is really awesome. So now let's talk about when you're looking at a deal. Do you have like a certain dollar amount that you want to make per deal, or is there another way that you analyze this? Like, how do you look at a deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's definitely not a specific dollar amount, although I would say my sights are set increasingly higher over time. I want it to be in the 5 or 6 figures in the near term, not in the 3 or 4 figures. But I think about most investments in terms of cash on cash. What is a dollar going into this going to get me each year coming out? And I basically want that dollar to give me at least $1.10. I want a 10% cash on cash return annually to, be interested in something.
Are you looking at a 10% return when you buy it, or are you looking to get that return after you maybe fix the property up a little bit and increase the rents?
Yeah, great question. The 10% return is definitely after stabilization. And part of the way that, investors can find good deals is find a building that on paper looks like a 1% return or a negative 10% return, and find out if there's something other people are missing, something you would do differently. So when I put together my pro formas and analyze properties, whether it's a single family home or, a 50 unit, building, I'm not really as interested in what it is now as what it would be and will be if properly managed. And that's where you can kind of find the needle in the haystacks, in the real estate market, even in hot markets like today.
Now, I'm just curious here, and I don't want this question to come off wrong, or, I think you've done some pretty awesome stuff with your investing, but we talk to a lot of people on the podcast that have built smaller portfolios. Maybe they've got a few houses that are paid off, or they have 5 or 10 properties that are generating really good cash flow. Did you ever think about having a smaller portfolio that maybe provided just as much money, or maybe you were making more per door? Like, did you ever consider going that route, or was getting a bigger portfolio really important to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's funny because my brother and I are the opposite types of investors, and he's very much that type of investor that he's paying off his primary home, and he's just got a handful of units that he's spending a lot of time on and getting a very high cash flow on. And part of what I love about real estate is there's no wrong way to do it.
Right.
There's a way that will fit almost any personality type. For me, I think part of the reason I have a lot of units is because I have learned a lot about leverage and try to understand the power that good debt can have. And so in an environment, I thought we had high inflation, 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of why I was, relishing fixing in, 5 and 10 year or even 30 year, fixed terms on loans at low interest rates that, in a real sense are negative rates because the actual, price, rent, and overall inflation is higher than the 3% or 4%, you're paying on your loans. So you're essentially getting paid to own these properties. So I do think from a financial point of view, paying off properties is not giving you a very good return. And it also exposes you to legal risk where, if someone slips and falls and gets sued, if you own $1 million of real estate free and clear, you could lose that $1 million entirely.
Right.
Whereas,
Sure.
If the bank owns 80 or 70 or 60% of it, that's not as appealing for, an attorney to go after because they're going to get a smaller, payout from a lawsuit. So there are other reasons that you might want to, consider using leverage. But for me, I've just enjoyed being able to, put properties in better condition, fix them up. And, where I didn't start with any capital of my own, the path I've chosen is working with investors and working as a team to try to build, a network and let people invest their savings and do good things, in our community in Maine.
Something else I always think is interesting to think about is when you have one or two rental properties, it can feel less risky because you only have one or two. But if those two tenants don't pay rent, you've got nothing. Where in your case, with over 100 rentals or 100 doors, if a few tenants move out, you probably don't even realize that, or it doesn't affect you as much.
Exactly. You're diversifying your risk. So I always prefer buildings with a lot of small units rather than a few big units, because again, you're able to sustain vacancy and do the remodeling without feeling a sort of mad rush to it, as you would in larger contexts. So I think when you're first starting out, you're at your highest risk level. So you want to be careful because when you buy that first single family home as your first investment, you're all or nothing. You're fully occupied or fully vacant.
Now, let's talk about controlling expenses because, it's exciting to talk about growing your income. But I feel like a lot of times you can be more profitable if you can really watch your expenses. Is there anything that you've been able to do to maybe lower your expenses and make your rentals more profitable?
Yeah, great question. So, I live in Maine where we have a very cold winter. And so there's a huge heating need. And I think most climates in the US are going to fall into, one of the two categories of either a lot of heating need or a lot of cooling need. And in either case, a great way to reduce expenses is if you inherit a building where the landlord is paying those heating and cooling costs, how can you reduce those costs? And there's two big ways. I mean, one is transition from a central heating or cooling system that the landlord pays and can't easily bill back to tenants into individual units. And the best way to do that I found is using heat pumps. So I'll inherit let's say a 4-unit building with an oil burning furnace that's, the landlord's spending, $6,000 or $8,000 or $10,000 a year to, operate. I'll go and install, 4 heat pumps for, $15,000 to $20,000. And then tenants are paying their own heating and cooling, from their electric bill. And I can actually charge a slightly lower and more competitive base rent, because of that. But I just saved a huge, 10 or 20% of my annual costs or more, by changing the way that heating is done. Often you can't, just stop heating a building because pipes in the basement might freeze, in a colder climate. And a great way to reduce that risk is by using spray foam insulation, either all the way from the rim joist down to the floor or part of the way, to the frost line or those sort of things. And, I've had buildings where I get a 1 or 200% return in year one because half of the heating cost of the building was just heating the basement. Which is
Wow.
crazy because the
Yeah.
earth under the frost line is 55 degrees Fahrenheit, almost anywhere. So as long as you can insulate your basement and not be losing a lot of air, in or out, it's going to stay above freezing.
Right. Yeah, that's really smart. So you're able to put that cost onto the tenant with having individual heat pumps, and then you're able to charge the tenant a lower rent, and that makes you more competitive in the marketplace.
Absolutely. I think, from a marketing standpoint, if I'm charging $900 and explaining that on average you'll pay $100 in utility bills versus the landlord next door with the identical unit charging $1,000, I win 8 or 9 times out of 10. I mean, there's some tenants that maybe they had a bad experience with utility bills and they want to just have the peace of mind of knowing the landlord's going to pay for it or what have you. And it varies by, locality and by unit class. I mean, so you want to generally not go too far away from what's normal, in your area. And it's interesting because there's certain towns, even in Maine, where utilities are always paid by the landlord, whereas in other places it's more mixed, so you have to keep tenant expectations in mind. But in general, I do prefer tenants being responsible for their own utilities because it just leads to less waste. In buildings where the landlord's paying that we inherit. I just had this the other day. I said to my manager, can you get, Brandy to shut her window? It's November. I'm paying the heat. This isn't good.
Right. Yeah. Tenants just don't care. They're not paying for it. It's not an expense that they're seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah. They'll get very frugal very quickly
Sure.
when they're paying for the thermostat. And I think that's really better for everyone.
Yeah.
They can control it and pay for what they want. And the landlord, doesn't have that expense on their books. And it dramatically increases the value of a building. Again, if you decrease your expenses on commercial property by 10 or 20%, that is a 10 or 20% or more, addition to the building value, depending
Sure.
on the cap rates in your area. So, every dollar of savings you can get is often $10 of building price. It's a really powerful driver.
Right. Now, let's talk about how you're managing your properties. I know property management has been a challenge for you over the years, and it's interesting to kind of see how you've evolved your management as you've grown out your portfolio. So maybe we can walk through how you've done it. So when you first started, were you self-managing or did you have a property manager?
Great question. I self-managed my first single-family rental property. I was putting up mouse traps. I was fixing their floorboards. I oversaw the new kitchen, remodeling. I did it all myself. And pretty quickly, I realized that, with my full-time day job at Bowdoin College, I was not going to be able to do a lot of physical labor on properties. So I started working with a handyman I had met and, other contractors that I found online or through, questioning relationships and that sort of thing. And pretty soon, I bought properties that sort of came with a property manager. So I thought, oh, great. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'll just work with that person. And they were kind of old school cash and checks and their bookkeeping wasn't keeping up. And it really created cash flow problems because they didn't know what to pay me. So they didn't pay me. That had to end pretty quickly. And I had learned, again, from listening to podcasts and talking with friends who did this on a bigger scale that, you kind of have two options. It's either find a really good third party manager, or start your own company or do your own management. And I decided for that latter path. So I somehow convinced my best friend from graduate school, who's a retired Navy officer and looking for a job that, the job could be managing my properties and we would start a company together and try to grow that company over time. And that's what we've done. We started with just him and me and both of us doing all the work, directly with that. And we now have, 6 part and full-time employees and, growing quickly. And, property management, I think most people would tell you is not a, high margin business. It's not highly profitable, but it's reliable. It's steady, and once you start managing a property, whether it's one of your own or for a third party, you're likely to be there for years, not months, so it generates very sustainable income, which I think is a very good thing in this day and age. But I've never earned a dime from my property management business directly. I've used all that money to pay, my partner and our employees and our contractors and reinvest in the business. And, now we have hats and jackets and that kind of thing, website, et cetera. But I'm doing it because the real money is in the buildings. It's in the cash flow and the appreciation from the buildings. And you want an A team doing that because you'll get great tenants, you'll get great rents, they'll be in great shape. And then when the appraiser comes, to appraise it, when you're selling or refinancing, you'll get a great price. That's the hope. So that's the long game, that I'm playing by controlling property management. And when I have a vacancy, I can, fill it very quickly by, cutting down to a low price. Where when I was, sort of in the hands of third parties, we would have vacancies for weeks or months, and I wasn't able to really see the effort and the showings, and it was frustrating. Whereas now, if we have a vacancy for any long length of time, it's my fault. I know it. There's no one else to blame but me, and I can change it if I pay attention and want to.
That makes a lot of sense. And you're giving your tenants better quality service. They're keeping the buildings up better. I mean, that makes so much sense to manage it the way that you want to manage it.
Absolutely. And it was on your show some years ago. I heard a great landlord, say it very eloquently, better than me, which is that, you should treat tenants like your customers, as if you're running a shoe store and, you should take off their shoes and help them try on the other ones. That's the kind of customer service we want to give to tenants because they're the ones paying your mortgage. They're the ones paying your taxes, your utility bills. They're the ones putting profit in your bank account to send your kids to college, et cetera. So, we always try to treat tenants as residents and call them residents and give them that level of respect that we would want to be shown if we were renting the same unit.
I love it. Well, if anybody wants to learn more about Dave, I've got a link to his website on my website. I've also got his email address on there if you want to reach out to him. You can find it all at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 342. If Dave inspired you and you're ready to buy your first rental property or you want to add to your portfolio, the lender that I recommend is our sponsor today. It's Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. Chaley is a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of different loan programs, including a first position HELOC. If you want to find out more, or if you are ready to get started today, you can contact Chaley at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE, lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you subscribe. We put out new interviews every single Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.